Number one, you sailed with Burnham aboard the Shenzhou. What is your assessment of her abilities?
Her mutiny aside, she is the smartest Starfleet officer I have ever known.
Huh. And he knows you.
So, here we are. Episode 3. Context is for kings. Now that the euphoria of the opening 2 episodes has waned somewhat, perhaps we can take a more critical eye to the details unfolding on Discovery. But first, let's address the tardigrade in the room, so to speak. A vocal minority of the Star Trek fan community has expressed concern over the aesthetic, the story structure, and the feel of Star Trek Discovery, as well as the issue of using CBS All Access as a vessel of broadcasting. It is true that the overall aesthetic and story structure of the show is different than previous incarnations of Trek. That's because it's 2017. The aesthetics of yesteryear aren't suitable to today's HD screens and methods of broadcast. Picture size, depth of color, production techniques, and styles of lighting have all changed through the decades for a variety of reasons, and Discovery necessarily has to inhabit the medium as it is today. The same is true for story structure. We currently live in an undeniably rich age of American television, a serialized age. In many ways, television has taken on the conventions typically associated with film, while some quadrants of modern mainstream film have regressed to a more episodic, old-school TV nature. Star Trek has notably dabbled with serialized storytelling before. However, Discovery is the first Trek series to truly occupy the serialized age. While this is the format that's popular with modern television right now, it promises to be a rewarding, even surprising format for Star Trek. As for the feel of Discovery and how it relates to Star Trek as a whole, it feels like a Trek show. Lots of details emerge in the watching that not only illustrate a deep love for the franchise, but that also exhibit the very DNA of Star Trek itself. From matching cinematic shots from previous productions, to captains enjoying music.
Yes, number one.
And keeping archaic technology in the ready room, to the presence of arrogant and morally questionable captains and admirals.
Captain Garth.
Lord Garth!
To characters arguing with computers.
You are harmful to the body.
The body it exists. It is healthy.
This is a life-saving circumstance. I'm going to die in here unless you let me out.
Speculation. Request to engage ethical protocols denied.
To sending your highest-ranking officers into dangerous situations. To even the strange danger of exploding computer consoles. Discovery has all the markings and some of the trappings of a typical Star Trek show. Even the threat of war with Klingons, or observing Klingons being motivated by a cultural, almost religious calling, feels very Trek. And there are even new Trek traditions present that have crept in without us realizing that they've become traditions. The infamous lens flares of the Kelvin timeline found their way into Discovery 8 years after their introduction in the 2009 film Star Trek. 8 years! The Klingons even found a way to weaponize it. Even the radical redesign of the Klingons, an issue we will break down soon on this channel, has precedent in Star Trek. Romulans, Tellarites, and other species have undergone subtle design changes throughout the years. More drastic changes have occurred to still other species, like the Trill. And the Klingons themselves have been changed before, which presented an opportunity for reaction in the canon, something Discovery may yet touch on. In regards to broadcasting on CBS All Access, it is worth knowing that Star Trek has had an unusual history when it comes to getting the show to the masses, and CBS's new streaming platform isn't really any different. The original series had to make not one, but 2 pilot episodes. Executives were interested in the first pilot, but had some concerns, so they made the rare request for Team Roddenberry to shoot a second pilot. Later, when the show was being threatened with cancellation, a spontaneous fan letter-writing campaign saved the show for another year, thus guaranteeing syndicated reruns. It was extremely rare in that era for fans to provide that kind of direct feedback. In the mid-'80s, when The Next Generation was beginning development, showrunners found that networks were reluctant to give this new Star Trek a try. In the end, they circumvented the networks by distributing The Next Generation to television stations directly. The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine found great success in this method. Cutting out the network middleman was appealing, so when Voyager came along, executives launched it and later Enterprise on a new network, UPN, the United Paramount Network. In light of this history, CBS All Access makes some sense. It's something necessarily new, something with more creative control and freedom for CBS, and a way for that network to compete in the streaming era. It is further evidence that nothing is really normal for a Star Trek production. All this to say that Discovery is an extremely Star Trek show. But enough of that. Let's take a look at this specific episode.
Context is for kings.
Warning, there are so many spoilers coming. Brace yourself. By all indications, this might be our first normal episode of Discovery so far. That doesn't mean much yet. It appears we are about to go down the rabbit hole of weirdness anyway. The heavy-handed Alice in Wonderland references are a great big clue that we ain't on the USS Kansas anymore. We've now been introduced to some memorable new characters. Mary Wiseman as the slightly awkward Sylvia Tilly.
I talk when I'm nervous. My instructors advised me to work on that.
Rekha Sharma as the no-nonsense Commander Landry.
Captain wants to see you.
And Anthony Rapp as a very memorable Lieutenant Stamets, an astromycologist.
Why would I tell a prisoner of the Federation who is essentially a temp the details of my top secret research?
It's your call.
And of course, Captain Lorca.
I like to think it makes me mysterious.
It is through Lieutenant Stamets that we touch on what may become another long-running theme in Discovery. That is the theme relating to the question, what is Starfleet really about? Is it a military organization? Or is it really about exploration?
Starfleet co-opted our research. They split us up. They put us in charge of 2 different teams so we could work twice as fast. Not for truth, or to further Starfleet's mission statement of diplomacy and exploration, but for war.
Star Trek has touched on this before.
What is it?
Every time we have dealings with Starfleet, I get nervous. We are dealing with something that could be perverted into a dreadful weapon.
How this plays out through Discovery's first season is anyone's guess at this point. However, combined with other little tidbits of information,
Black alert. Black alert.
Discovery is painting a pretty thorough impression that the military impulse in Starfleet,
You ever seen a black badge before?
has pulled out all the stops. Also, in this episode, we are introduced to Discovery's main mission, research into a type of fungi which turns out to be a gateway to string theory. I have more questions about that. However, as it relates to canon, this might be a very interesting change of pace. Whatever this technology is, it's not present in future Trek shows that we know of. Perhaps this is the beginning of Starfleet's fascination with transwarp. Maybe this is where we first bump into the Warp 10 barrier. Or maybe this is the basis for how the Iconian gateways operate. Hard to say at this early a juncture. One lovely aspect to Discovery so far is that of the effect of consequences for one's actions. The life imprisonment sentence handed to Michael Burnham is quite a devastating blow to our main character. As a serious consequence of the mutiny, Burnham starts this episode as an infamous pariah, known throughout as Starfleet's first mutineer. There's nowhere else for Burnham to go except to rise up to reclaim some of her previous glory, and maybe she'll do it. This is quite an unusual place to begin with a main Star Trek character, but it isn't brand new. This is a character arc that bears some resemblance to that of Ro Laren, and perhaps also to Tom Paris. Ro Laren was, in the 24th century, also a kind of pariah or outcast, having disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer, which resulted in the death of an entire away team. Ro Laren is the one other character in Star Trek to which we can really compare to Michael Burnham.
I'm fully aware of your Starfleet record. of your problems on other ships, and the incident at Garon 2 that led to your court-martial.
Laren was able to impress senior officers, namely Captain Picard, and eventually she returned to a reasonably normal Starfleet life. That is, until she betrayed her ship and captain in joining a terrorist group, the Maquis.
Could you tell Captain Picard something for me?
Of course, what is it?
Tell him I'm sorry.
Tom Paris, at the very beginning of Voyager, is in a Starfleet prison for treason, again having to do with the Maquis. Captain Janeway gave Paris a chance at redemption, as long as Paris would provide assistance in tracking down other members of that terrorist group. He does, and eventually Paris becomes a mostly normal Starfleet officer. So this is territory that we've seen before in Star Trek. What's refreshing about it is that we are seeing Discovery through the eyes of the Starfleet outcast herself. This time, the consequences of Burnham's actions, unlike that of Ro Laren's or Tom Paris's, won't be so easily resolved by the end of the episode. A similar sentiment can be said for Captain Lorca, played by Jason Isaacs. We've seen the morally questionable captain or admiral story before in Starfleet. However, this is the first time that we will get to see the activities of such a character up close over the course of an entire season, and with some assurances that Lorca's actions will have real consequences. It is bound to be an illuminating season. Get your mushrooms ready. Thank you for watching. If you like this and other Trexpertise videos, then consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. It is the best way for you to help create more Trexpertise. You can find the link to our Patreon page in the subspace below. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, check out these excellent Discovery reviews by the YouTube channel Classic Flicks. Enjoy.